see my slide. Okay, here's the topic of today's lecture. First of all, I'd like to introduce about me and our journal. As what Professor Shen just said, our journal International Review for Spatial Planning and Sustainable Development has been indexed by this major database. And there are 4 major sections in our journal concerned about different topics. My name is Jingjing, and here I have been working for 5 years as an editor in IRSPSD. Today's lecture is more on editor's perspective about paper writing and forming, rather than how to improve your research. So paper writing requires your ability to research and to writing. I would say have to have. For many students and researchers, the process of writing a paper is just like learning how to write. So our aim for holding this lecture is to provide more ideas and maybe assistance for students and researchers in writing and submitting. In the future, our editorial office will continue to hold more activities like this to bond our relationship with our readers and authors and share more experience with you. And now let's look at what we have today. Here's the content we're going to introduce. The first is your preparation before submitting a paper. How to impress editors in the first expression. And then the tips about writing will be given in the order of the structure, section by section. And at last, I will give some advices from an editor's aspect to avoid some troubles that may easily occur for some authors. So now I will start with my first point, what to do before submitting your paper. Before submission, of course, you need to do enough preparation to submit your article. But I noticed some authors have thoughts like this. What does it matter? What does it matter if I give trials on some journals? So they can move to the next target quickly after being rejected by one. I'm not saying it is not correct to find several targeted journals, but one most important thing is multiple submission is prohibited. I think you should already know this. If you don't, please go to Google it after this lecture, okay? And my point is, it makes no sense to make several attempts without enough preparation and understanding about the journal. It will even leave the editors a lower impression on the authors if the submission is obviously unprepared. So do not try meaningless submission. So before you click the submitting button, please ask yourself 3 questions. What are the aims and scopes of this journal? Will my research be covered by a section or column of this journal? And have I read their requirement about submission and adjusted my article as required? I believe this won't take you much time. After all, you can get enough information from journal's homepage. And I will explain each question. Here is the process of a submission will undergo. Once your article is submitted, it will be checked by a managing editor or editor-in-chief. That depends on the journal. A bad impression will make your article be rejected by editors before review process. That is called desk reject. After desk checking, qualified papers will be sent to peer review, and when the review is finished, editor-in-chief will make decisions based on the comments from reviewers and other editors. These 3 questions are proposed to avoid desk reject. The first one is easy to understand. The content of your research must be in the scope of this journal, or it will be rejected without any questions. Some authors decide a targeted journal by the name. This is not enough, especially for interdisciplinary science. But some authors ignore the second question. Will my research be covered by a section or column of this journal? This can relate it to the content or type of your article. Some journals are divided by topics, like our journal IRSPSD. We have sections of planning strategies and design concept, planning implement, and planning assessment like this. And some journals are divided by types of articles like research article, case analysis, comment, or newsletters. So make sure what your article is oriented at. If your topic is exactly what the journal focus and your research is innovative, I can say you are just halfway from being accepted. After the first 2 insurance before submission, now you have to make sure your article will not be denied on the very first glance. Even the topic is intriguing. For an editor, what kind of papers would you like to reject after a quick scan? I think most of us will agree on the formatting issue. As an author, it annoys me sometimes because every journal, have its own requirement about the format, but we have to follow it because it can be vital in the first stage of judgment. Formatting is a process demands your patience and your attention, but it shows your attitude to it. And I would say it is an important ability as a researcher. Most journals have a template for formatting, so it is easy to follow. I list some frequently occur problems in our work, like the numbering of titles and subtitles. These mistakes can be created by automatic numbering function. And some figures and tables embedded into your document must fit on the page. So you have to use appropriate function to arrange your figures and text, especially the caption of figures. And some also have typos and grammatical mistakes in English writing. That is very obvious. And some authors miss like wrong citation styles because there are many mainstream citation styles like unlisted. So you have to figure out what is required by a journal. Of course, there's particularly important issue in desk tracking process and review process. That is the structure of a paper. And this is the main context we are going to talk about, how to structure a research paper. Now we will have a further look at each part of a research paper in order. To start with, I will have an eye-catching title and a 3C abstract to introduce your paper. Title can be the most important part of your paper. Before publication, it helps editors and reviewers to make judgments about the paper. It is appropriate to the journal and it is to my expertise, so I can review it. This requires your title to be concise enough but not vague and abstract. The title should closely focus on the issue you study, and this issue should be clearly reflected in the main text. Some authors use a narrative sentence like stating a fact. This cannot be effective for your research. If your research is a review article, the key problem you are reviewing should be the core of the title. If this is a case study, the case and the innovation of your study should be displayed in the title. Anyway, you must try to convey as much valid information as possible within 30 words, including a subtitle. Then you can give your research a qualified title. Here, I will give a comparative example about effective titles. In the first example, you can see the study aim and a rough study object, but it is not accurate enough because it cannot be the whole subject. Otherwise, the scope will be too wide. And we cannot see method from it. We cannot even tell is it a review or empirical study from the title. In the second one, we can clearly see the study object, the aim, and the method used. And of course, it must be a method application with the study of a chosen area. For readers, this one can be a much more effective one, so they can decide whether to read the other part of the paper when seeing the title. On the basis of being qualified, you can also try to make your title more eye-catching and fun. The advantages of a striking title is that after publication, it can appeal more readers and probably it can increase the citation of your paper. So a metaphor, a question, a description, some things like this can make your title unique and appealing to readers. Here I give some examples. As you can see, these titles have used some tricks like this. Maybe you will have problem about the third one, but you should know it is a review article about the national landscape planning and history. So what do you think about these titles? You can let me know. And after telling titles, next we will talk about the abstract. The essence of a paper, but you cannot simply make it a short version of paper. You can understand it as a summary of your research. And as a researcher, you should know when you're searching for document in a database, the titles are for us to judge if the results are relative to our studies. And then we will read the abstract to see if the content is what we are looking for. So abstract is as important as title. Using statement, these things should be covered in the abstract. Your research problem and objectives, your methods, your key results or argument, important conclusions. When writing the abstract, it is about your ability to extract the key points from a paper of several thousands of words. You need to keep the sentences short and focused. And you have to avoid acronyms and citations in your abstract. Not a shallow introduction, of course, and you cannot list items one by one, like the aim is, the method is, the conclusions are. So a good abstract should highlight the innovation of the research while present things clearly. Here, I suggest the 3 C's for an abstract. The first C is for concise. You have to cover the main aspects of a paper with approximately 200 to 300 words. So only necessary information should be selected, and the sentences can't be too long. The second C is clear. Clear is about how the items we mentioned can be reflected or even highlighted from the words. So the problem, the innovative method, and your crucial conclusions must be clearly written. The last one, concrete. It is an opposite word to abstract. So some authors misunderstand it and make their abstracts too weak, like a description of paper, or use too many words about how important your research are while you do the research, but provide little valuable content in your abstract. About how to write, I suggest to use 1 or 2 sentences to introduce the background and the course of your study, referring to aims and objects. Then 1 sentence about the approach you choose to figure out what problem. Next, 1 sentence about the summary of results and key findings are used after using your approach. And the last 2 sentences should be for major point of view, like your conclusions and recommendations. So here's the start of a paper. After it, now we're going to move to the first section of a paper, introduction. Introduction is like the window to the whole paper. So a good introduction will give a clear overlook of the whole paper. If readers are still not clear about it, maybe your window should be wiped. Some authors write it as a background. It is not wrong, but not enough for an introduction. Introduction is for authors to introduce the research. Why we do this? What's the cost of this research and why is my research necessary? The background that renders the problem, and you need to solve this problem or figure out the reasons for the problem. By doing this, what is the predicted outcome? In order to come up with your specific research problem, what is usually started in an introduction is the background. The status quo of your study area, current researches about a frequently rising problem, a case that calls for urgent improvement, something like this, like what I list in the left part of this figure. If you have a specific object, it should be explained in this part as well. So when the left part, the background, is introduced, your research problem can be reasonable for readers, and the significance of it will show. Then the content about the background can take up a big part of your introduction. But don't forget the right part. The primitive mission of an introduction is to establish your research problem. After the background is introduced, it is appropriate to propose the research problem. So when you write, remember to build the logical relationship between them. Your research problem can also be part of your aim or goals of the study. By solving the problem, the value of this study is to achieve goals like improve a situation, provide thoughts from other aspects in a topic, and even from a new concept or theory. Center with the problem and your aim, more information about your research is needed. targeted at your research problem. In what approach will you do with this? And what is expected outcome after using the method? What to conclude from the results? All this, the right part of the figure, consists a brief frame of your whole research. So this part can be viewed as a preview of the whole paper. Then readers will have a clear mind about what will you do in the following part. In summary, the final part of an introduction is often dedicated to a brief overview to the rest of the paper. And now we're going to talk about the review. Advantageous element in your paper. Many people can make their results fabulous and delicate, but a qualified review will show your effort and expertise in the field. Review can provide a good way to present your accumulation of knowledge and provide a theoretical basis for your research. Here, I got a question for you. Who do you think your review actually involves? Who are the potential readers of your review? I believe the very first answer is for long-standing research of yourself. There must be enough review for yourself to read, because a thorough and systematic review and research need your deep understanding to this field. And your review is also for peer colleagues and reviewers, because reviewers are the experts from your field. So remember to do enough work about it and don't ignore your possibly reviewers. About what to review, this question you propose and going to solve it. Some people have too many things to review. Background, method, similar studies like this, and they don't know what to do. I think you should choose important and insightful studies in the related topics, and your review should directly targeted at your research problem. It is meaningless to pile up too many reviews, but you should have a clear mind about the status of this topic. For some research, a single section for review is not required, but no research can be good without enough review. It is like a look back of what you already have, and like you are standing on the shoulders of giants. So we must be aware of what position we are in now and what do we have. I can't answer the question of how to write a good review because it is just a deep question, and a review can be guided by some types, but it presents your workload in your research process. So I will just tell the importance of a good review. A good review not only leaves an impression to our editors and reviewers, but it will also help to increase your citations of the paper. For reviewers, they're usually the experts in the related field. So maybe the author you review can be the reviewer of your paper. And a good review can provide sufficient information to related studies. So if you searched a journal in database and ranked the results by citations, I believe the top highest citation papers are always review papers than empirical studies. But as an editor, I do have some tips for it. Some authors are not sure about what to do in an article in the review part. Although we know review is about related works, but there are many aspects like previous studies and on the methods or the problem. My suggestion is to focus on the problem firstly, and if the focus of your study is conducting a new method or conducting a new concept, you can review several aspects of a topic, but you have to make your review well organized and methodical. Another important thing I have to mention is to be rational and objective when you review document. Make your own judgment and don't be easily influenced by others. You can even be picky when you absorb ideas and thoughts from papers. Anyway, not all published works are 100% correct. So scientific research requires you be willing to question, even to question the authorities. You have to keep your mind clear in the review. After it, now we come to our fifth part, methodology. From an editor's aspect, I think almost 70 to 80% authors failed in this stage. Because I think some even ignore it and combine it with review or introduction. In fact, methodology is very important. No matter if your research is empirical or argumentative research. Also, methodology should be centered with the problems and aims. The aim problem was proposed in the first section, introduction, like what we talked about. And review is what you have done to get more information about it. After knowing it enough, you should select a proper approach to solve the problem you proposed or examine it. That is the meaning of a methodology. Some authors merely simply introduce the highlight and innovative study method. Of course, that's an important aspect, but it's not enough. In fact, you should present the inner relationship of the key problem with each section in your paper. So some people may ask a question like this: what can I write if my method is not innovative enough? This happens a lot to many researchers. For example, for data collection, questionnaires and survey are quite common ways. And maybe you just use some approaches like SPSS, a widely used way for analyzing. So some authors don't know what can they introduce in the methodology. Actually, each method can be characterized in the process of being adopted to the object. So details about how you adjust it to suit your case should be introduced. For example, in questionnaire designed for your perception to a place, you must have set questions based on people's sense and feelings towards a place. And then you can introduce how would you quantify the result, and how can you define the difference of this place other than any other places. All these problems should be well explained in your methodology part. And don't ignore any step that will finally help to produce the result. Again, I take data analyzing for example, because it is a popular topic in our spatial planning field. Usually, the method consists of data collection, data processing and screening, data analysis, and then result can be obtained. First of all, the framework of the workflow of research should be drawn to give readers a comprehensive look of your study method and steps. then it is better for you to introduce step by step. Like, how can you collect your data? And then in data processing and screening, maybe this is a not required step, but you have to explain if you do it. And in data analyzing stage, there are many ways to analyze it. To produce and visualize your result. So it is necessary to explain the way you choose, why the way you choose is a proper one, and does it have enough advantages. Some people may don't know about what is the methodology of an argumentative research. Here I take a literature review for example. Of course, review is the method you use. But what kind of review should be defined? It is a systematic one, integrate review, or meta-analysis review like this. And then what materials are used to do in the review should be defined. And you should explain the reasons for selecting criteria when you're selecting documents and the papers. So to summarize, a good methodology will make readers to have a full understanding about all the process. So authors and readers will know what to expect in the next section, the results section. The results section can make your research paper much more professional. The content of result differs a lot depending on the types of research and on the method you use. So I will just say from a general aspect and give some pieces of advice to make your result look more professional and high quality. So in general, the result section includes the following elements. A very short introductory context that repeats the research question and helps to understand your result. This part is to echo the we previously mentioned your research problem and make the paper more focused. Then a systematic description of the main findings in a logical order should be right. And you should highlight the most relative result. The second part sometimes can be combined with the first one. And then you should report on results of each stage. Again, take data mining, for example. The results should be reported in the order of data collection, data processing and screening, and data analysis. It is okay to report on different result types or other aspects of results. Just make sure your results are arranged in reasonable order. And the last part should be some other important secondary findings like secondary outcomes or subgroups of analysis. But remember, you don't need to mention any single result. Besides these 4 sections, one thing important is the visual element, such as figures, charts, maps, tables. These things can summarize and illustrate the findings. This element should be cited in the text and remembered in order. So figures and tables should be able to stand on its own. Should be able to stand on its own without the text, which means that the legend of your figures should include enough information to understand the non-textual element. And my first advice for result is visualization is always better than listing items and piling up data. This is a frequently happened situation, especially when you have produced too many results. It is easy to have massive statistics and data. And of course, data can be directly shown by listing tables. But imagine a paper with only tables, listing too many data from different objectives in groups. What's your feeling to it? I have to admit that not all readers are expert in this topic. Even reviewers may not be familiar with every method used in the research. As an editor and also a reader in the field of spatial planning, for me, if a paper is full of similar tables with data filling in it, I will judge it a paper with relatively few efforts in improving your outcome. Maybe your method cannot be innovative enough, I would say. Maybe it is offensive, but I had to admit it is a truly feeling. So ways to visualize is important, and they are not limited to traditional graphs, pie charts, line charts like this. For our field, it is recommended to combine your outcome with maps of your study area and make the research result more understandable and clear. And of course, not all results can be visualized. You can just try if possible. If it is an easy way to make the paper more professional and acceptable. But you should remember when doing visualization, you must notice the quality of figures because poor quality or bad visual effects will make your efforts produce converse results. That is what we don't want. And my second piece of advice is an author should make each part of the result logically related. This thing we have repeated so many times, so don't forget to echo and emphasize the problem you research. In the process of researching, many results will be produced. Sometimes it is important for an author to cut it down rather than adding them up, because the latter part, discussion and conclusion, should be built on your result. So a relative result will influence the reading and understanding of your paper. So when you arrange the structure of the result section, do remember to make each part logically related and just cut off the irrelative result. And now we are going to talk about the end of a paper, discussion and conclusion. We are now almost to our lecture's end. Here, I combine discussion and the conclusion together. It's not because either of them are less important than the other. In fact, they are greatly significant in the paper. So the reason I discuss the two sections together is because they differ in different kinds of papers, and sometimes they are even combined into one section. And for many authors, they just confuse and mix up the two sections. So I will talk about how to distinguish the two. And what we mentioned about the discussion and conclusion are drawn from the results. Discussion is based on what you obtained in the result section. So at the beginning of a discussion, an essential interpretation of the tendency from the results or the rules observed from the findings should be written. And depending on the different kinds of research, the content of discussion can be the phenomenon after your observation to the results. It can be the possible cause of the phenomenon. It can also be a comparison with the hypothesis you previously came up with. And it can be a discussion about what's the possible developing trend under other conditions. In a review article, you can discuss the content to be featured in common after you studying different cases, or the rules that suit variable conditions you can get from it. Also, you should tell the limitation of your study. I believe no one can conduct a research in 100% ideal conditions. So many variables out of control will influence your accuracy, your justice of your research. And even though technologies develop quickly, it is maybe not enough for your concept. Those things like these limitations should be discussed in this section to deduce the subjectivity in your research. And about the limitation of research, I think you may ask where it should be stated. Isn't it should be in the conclusion section? And here I will introduce the content of conclusion. According to a survey, conclusion is considered the most difficult section to write for most authors. So you need to extract all the crucial ideas and findings from your research works. A good conclusion can be significantly level up the quality of your paper. However, currently at editors, we see many authors just give a relatively shallow conclusions. Some authors even just repeat the importance and the value of their conclusion again in this part. As you should know, repeating these things again will not increase the value of your research, but a good conclusion can. So here I'm going to introduce what information should be included in discussion with the information and where should they be placed in the conclusion section. One easy way to avoid this confusion is to consider your conclusion as a summary of everything you have said so far. In the conclusion section, you remind readers of what they have just read. So your conclusion should include this following part, like restate your hypothesis or research problem, restate your major findings, tell the readers what contribution your study has made to the existing literature. And again, you can highlight your limitations. This part is related to the last point. That is, you can state the future direction of your research. That is what we call future works. And the sixth point is you can make your recommendations based on what you have studied so far. And besides, you also have some not to do's in your conclusions, like introduce new arguments, introduce new data, or fail to include your research question or introduce new arguments in this part. So the conclusions should be insightful and inspiring. It can be an opening to another new study. For a review article, the key point drawn from the literature should be extracted and emphasized in this section. You can make them concise for readers to understand. And for empirical studies, the content of discussion can be combined with conclusion into one section sometimes. That depends on your content. But if your research is one with great value, I think you won't miss a section like this. And one thing need to note is that maybe your conclusion can be summarized in several points. You cannot make the entire conclusion like listing points, starting from 1 to 3 without a description or introduction in this section. You can list a significant idea and recommendations, but you have to make them simple and concise in your text. And now we have introduced about the basic rules of paper structure. In this structure with some moderate changes, but you cannot create a totally new one. So I think you better to obey a basic rule in publication. The next part is reference. Here, you almost finish a paper and maybe you can't wait to submit it, your achievement to a journal. But wait, have you double-checked your citations and make everything insured? Reference is the way to show your respect to previous works. We talked about the different formats, styles required by journals in terms of citations. And in this part, I'd like to introduce some details from editor's aspect. I believe our attendees should have your own way to manage documents, and some maybe have better ways than I have. But if you don't, I urgently recommend you to use literature management tools like Mendeley, Note Express, and Note, something like this. By using the tool, you can adapt your reference into different formats quickly and make sure all the listed references can match the inserted citations one by one. And from my observation, I think it is not widely used by all authors. But these tools can be added into Office software, and it can significantly improve the efficiency of your work. So I advise you to develop this habit of using a literature management tool. As we are talking about the reference, I slightly introduce some not-dos in terms of plagiarism. We all know that plagiarism is about publication ethics and it is prohibited. So we have to cite references in our research. Even some of them are our own works we have to cite. For figures and tables, even if they're created by yourself, you cannot use it again in other papers after they are being publication. So if necessary, you can make a thorough modification on your works, but don't copy it. When cite, copy the sentence or just state it in a different sentence structure. What you need to do is to extract the essence of the sentence and narrate it in your own words. And if possible, please try to do a plagiarism check for your paper and avoid the repeated part. At last, I will mention two frequently occur problems in article writing. They are not so serious, but I think they have to be overcome. The first one is a habit of repeating the same word or part of speech again and again. Something like this can be unconscious and some people can aware of this. This happens more often in an oral speech. Like me, myself, maybe I have a problem like this, repeating a same word like then maybe too many times. But when the situation is in a paper, it can be even more obvious and make your paper weird, especially when the repeated word is not so common. So try to avoid this, please. The other problem is to avoid The other problem is, just as I mentioned, is to avoid making the writing like oral speech. Most of us are not English native speakers, so it is not easy for us to use high-level words. But at least we can try to make our content formal. So don't use Google Translation to convert a sentence of your mother tongue directly into English. This can be quite obvious when you read it. Now we have talked about your preparations before submission and the content, the things to do to be noticed in the order of a paper structure. You should be well prepared to submit your work to journal and publish your achievement to the world. So at last, I will give some tips during the process of submission. Hope you can go well in the process. So when your paper is well prepared, don't forget to write a cover letter for it. The cover letter is for the editors-in-chief or managing editors who will see and handle your paper. Your cover letter should be sincere and concise. In the content, you should briefly introduce your research, explain why the topic is appropriate for the journal, and make your statement about the copyright. Again, please be careful with the requirements of the journal and adjust your cover letter with the requirement, because use the same letter again and again may be found by the editors and it will show no respect. After submitting it, for most journals, you can check the progress of your paper in the system, and hopefully it will be accepted to publication. But in most cases, your paper will need some revisions. In this case, you can receive the comments from reviewers and editors. And of course, you must revise the paper according to reviewers' comment. So you should write, when you revise it, you should write a response. A response is used to answer the problem and point out what you have done to fix the problem. In the response, the comment given by reviewers should be listed one by one, and your response should be respectively match each point. Even you don't agree with some comments from reviewers, you should make your explanation or state your argument to it. So when you're ready to submit your revised paper, according to the established rules, you should express your appreciation to the reviewers and editors, especially to reviewers, because in the second round of review, they are likely to review your paper again. So different journals may also have specific rules for response and revised paper. You should check it before you send it. And when you send emails, please also note the addressing of recipients of your emails and cover letters, because maybe you don't know who will receive it. So you can try to use gender-neutral address to greet your receivers, like editor, doctor, professor, or simply you can write to whom it may concern, because a wrong address may be not polite to the reviewers. Now, here's today's sharing about how to form our research paper from my aspects. And of course, some laws differ according to the different disciplines. And my experience is more about urban planning and architecture field. So anyway, your hard works in the research will pay off in your paper. And I hope you will succeed in the process. And at the end, I hope you can subscribe our Twitter channel or WeChat. We have two QR codes on the screen. The left one is for WeChat account and the right one is for Twitter. You can follow us and leave us messages to share your ideas and your experience to us. And you can also share your problems and feelings about the lecture today. So again, thank you for your listening. And I hope you all will succeed in your research progress and make your works published very well. And that is all for my today's lecture. So maybe will anyone have questions to today's lecture?